Can anyone make this shot?" The general's voice thundered across the military academy training range, his eyes scanning rows of young cadets who suddenly found their boots fascinating. 100 yards out, an impossible target swayed in the wind, smaller than a man's fist, positioned through a narrow gap between two concrete barriers. The general waited, his jaw set, disappointment already creeping into his expression. Then, from the back of the observation area, near the equipment shed, a weathered hand slowly rose. Everyone turned. It was the janitor, a 70-year-old man in a red jacket over a faded t-shirt, white hair and beard catching the afternoon sun, his face carrying that same sad, serious expression he wore every day as he emptied trash cans and mopped floors. The cadets snickered. The general's eyes narrowed. Thomas Miller had worked at the academy for 6 years. Every morning at 5, he arrived in his old pickup truck parked in the far corner of the lot and began his rounds. He cleaned classrooms where young men and women studied tactics he once lived. He swept the range where instructors taught marksmanship he had perfected decades ago. No one asked about his past. No one looked twice at the quiet old man who kept his head down and did his work. His red jacket was worn at the elbows, his hands calloused, from mops and brooms, his eyes holding memories he never shared. The cadets passed him in hallways without acknowledgement, sometimes leaving extra messes, occasionally making jokes just loud enough for him to hear. Thomas said nothing. He simply cleaned, his expression never changing, that perpetual sadness settled deep in the lines of his face. The demonstration had been called to inspire the cadets, to show them what excellence looked like. General Hawthorne had invited the Academy's top marksmanship instructors, men half his age with competition medals and perfect scores. One by one they had tried. One by one they had failed. The shot required threading around through a 6-inch gap at 100 yards, then striking a target barely visible beyond it. Wind conditions were poor. The angle was severe. It was a shot designed to be nearly impossible, meant to teach humility and the limits of skill. The general had made his point. The instructors had tried their best and come up short. Then that hand had risen from the back, gnarled fingers steady despite their age, and the entire range had fallen silent except for the wind and a few scattered laughs. "Step aside," the general said, his voice carrying an edge of irritation mixed with curiosity. Thomas walked forward slowly, his gait steady despite his years. The cadets parted, some smirking, others exchanging glances. "Who does this old man think he is?" someone whispered. The instructors stood with arms crossed, professional courtesy barely masking their skepticism. Thomas reached the firing line and looked at the rifle, a standard-issue M4 he had not held in years. He picked it up with a familiarity that made one instructor's eyebrow raise. The weapon settled into his shoulder like it had never left. His hands found their positions without thought, muscle memory from another lifetime taking over. The sad expression never changed, but something shifted in his eyes, something distant and focused that had not been there when he held a mop. The general watched, his irritation giving way to something else, something he could not quite name. There was something about the way the old janitor handled that rifle, something about his stance, the way his breathing automatically regulated, the way his finger rested along the trigger guard with perfect discipline. Thomas did not speak. He did not look at the crowd. He simply settled into position, his body remembering what his mind had tried to forget. The range fell quiet. Even the wind seemed to pause. Thomas's finger moved to the trigger. His breathing slowed. The sad, serious expression on his weathered face remained unchanged. But behind his eyes, he was somewhere else. Someone else. In a place where impossible shots were just another day's work. The crack of the rifle split the silence. Before the echo faded, the distant clang of metal confirmed what everyone's eyes could barely believe. Dead center. Through the gap, through the wind, through the impossible angle, the round had found its mark with surgical precision. The electronic target system lit up, confirming a perfect hit. Thomas lowered the rifle, cleared it with practiced efficiency, and set it down. He did not smile. He did not celebrate. He simply stood there, that same sad expression on his face, waiting to return to his mop and bucket. The cadets stood frozen. The instructors stared. General Hawthorne's face had gone pale, his eyes locked on the old man in the red jacket, something clicking in his memory, something he should have seen 6 years ago. "What is your name?" the general asked. His voice suddenly different, quieter, almost reverent. "Thomas Miller, sir," came the soft reply. The general took a step closer, his eyes scanning the old man's face, the white beard, the sad eyes, the worn red jacket. "Miller?" the general repeated, and then his eyes widened. "Thomas Miller, Sergeant Thomas Miller." The general's hand slowly rose to his forehead in a salute so sharp it could have cut glass. Every instructor on the range immediately snapped to attention. The cadets, confused but trained, followed suit. Thomas stood there, his sad expression flickering for just a moment, something painful crossing his features before settling back into that familiar melancholy. General Hawthorne's voice carried across the now silent range, addressing the cadets but never taking his eyes off Thomas. "This man," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "is not just a janitor." 30 years ago, Sergeant Thomas Miller was the most decorated sniper in the United States Marine Corps. He held records that still stand today. He saved countless lives in operations you will never read about in your textbooks. He trained the men who trained your instructors. The general paused, his jaw working as he struggled with his own emotions. After his final tour, after losing his entire team in an operation that went sideways through no fault of his own, he disappeared. We looked for him. We wanted to honour him. He chose silence instead. The cadets stood motionless, their earlier smirks replaced by shame that coloured their faces red. One young woman who had complained just yesterday about the janitor not emptying her classroom trash quickly enough felt tears streaming down her cheeks. The instructors, men who had spent years perfecting their craft, looked at the worn figure in the red jacket with new understanding. Thomas had spent 6 years walking among them, invisible, dismissed, cleaning up after people who did not know they stood in the presence of a legend. He had endured their thoughtlessness, their casual disrespect, their complete failure to see him, and he had said nothing. He had simply done his work, carried his grief, and kept his past buried under mop water and floor wax. "I left because I could not carry it anymore," Thomas finally spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "Every shot I made I remembered. Every life I took to save others, I carried. My team, my brothers, they died because I made a call, the right call, but they still died. I did not want medals, I did not want recognition. I wanted to be invisible, to do simple work, to not be the man who killed from 1,000 yards away." The general nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. "But you are that man," he said gently. "You always will be. And these young people," he gestured to the cadets, "they need to understand that heroism does not always wear a uniform. Sometimes it wears a janitor's jacket and carries the weight of service in silence." The academy's commandant arrived within the hour, summoned by a call from General Hawthorne. By evening, Thomas Miller's story had spread through every building on the base. The next morning, when Thomas arrived in his old pickup truck, cadets stood waiting. They stood at attention as he walked to the equipment shed. They offered to help with his work, offers he gently declined, but their respect was evident in every interaction. The commandant called Thomas to his office, offered him a position as a marksmanship instructor, a rank restoration, full benefits, recognition. Thomas sat in that office, his sad, serious face unchanged, and quietly declined. "I am content with my mop," he said. "But perhaps, if you would allow it, I could speak to the cadets sometimes, remind them that everyone they meet carries a story they cannot see." The academy agreed. Once a month, Thomas Miller sets aside his cleaning equipment and stands before a class. He does not talk about his shots or his medals. He talks about respect, about seeing people, about understanding that the person you dismissed today might be the person who once stood between you and danger. He talks about service that continues long after the uniform comes off, about carrying weight that never fully lifts, about finding purpose in simple work and dignity in being unseen. The cadets listen with an attention they give no other instructor. They have seen the impossible shot, they know the legend in the red jacket. And when class ends, Thomas picks up his mop again, his expression sad and serious, his white hair and beard marking him as the old janitor who was so much more. General Hawthorne visits the range often now. Sometimes he finds Thomas there early in the morning before the cadets arrive, standing at the firing line, not shooting, just remembering. The general stands with him in silence, two old soldiers sharing the weight of service, the cost of decisions, the memories that never fade. They do not need words. The respect between them is complete, forged in understanding that some men carry their battles long after the war ends, that heroism sometimes looks like an old man in a worn red jacket choosing invisibility over glory, choosing service over recognition, choosing to clean floors in the place where warriors are made because it is the only peace he can find. And in that choice, in that quiet dignity, there is a lesson more powerful than any shot, no matter how impossible.